gentlemen, a warm welcome to IHC I Love Samanvay series on modern classics of Indian literature. Thank you for making time on a rather unpopular day for programs, but we have very engaging scholars here who would look at two important works from Kannada, which is Vamshavriksha and Samskara. Professor Satyanath was professor at the Department of Modern Indian Languages at the Delhi University. He recently retired. I know him from many students who recall fondly about his guidance and how he instilled a love for comparative literature. I myself was a student of comparative literature at the Central University of Kerala, so I've met many of his students at various occasions. Professor Rashmi Doraiswamy is with the Jamia Millia Islamia University. She's a professor there. And my own experience and understanding from my colleagues is that she used to help us a lot with the film club activities in the past. And it's rather new that I'm engaging with you. I'm a recent joinee. And her work spans film culture, and she would be looking at the film adaptations of these two important texts and what it tells us. We also have multilingual scholar, translator, Rita Kothari with us. She recently shifted to the Ashoka University, so we're happy that she would be in Delhi from now on. And her work includes a lot of work in translation. She looks at the Sindh, Kutch, Gujarati space closely, and I'm sure her point of view would bring in a very fresh perspective into the discussions. So I welcome all the three scholars here, and we're a small group. And may I invite Professor Satyanath to take this forward from here. Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity and invitation. I have one or two things to say just before I start formally. My relationship with Rashmi is almost 1978. And one of Karnat's Ondanondu Kaladali, the Kannada film which was selected, she and her then boyfriend, now husband, Madan Gopal. We had a heated discussion on that. And my relationship with the other speaker is 2005 in Asian Translation Traditions, a conference which she and Devi organized at Tejgad. And then I think we have we have been going to Asian Translation Tradition, and just now she told me it more or less it has died its death. The second thing that I wanted to mention is a sad thing. In 2015, from the ILF platform, we had a day's symposium on translation. It was organized by Avdesh Kumar Singh. Avdesh Kumar Singh recently passed away. And yesterday was his cremation in Surat. So I feel that it is, as a person who spearheaded translation, comparative literature, and a variety of activities associated with Indian literature, I personally feel it's very important to remember him at this moment. And as I was very closely associated with him in several projects, I feel the lacuna of his absence. With this, let me start. I intend to enter, and I think somewhere either through Facebook or someone, and there is a small informal talk among ourselves. I myself gave a title, Vamshavriksha and Samskara, text, film, and the cultural public sphere of the 1970s, and I would be starting that. And as a student of comparative literature and historiography, I would basically I would be constructing a sort of a sketch of a 1970s public sphere in Bangalore, where a lot of these activities took place. And I would defocus it from both from the text and the film and the author. That I am doing within the framework of the recent approaches to literary historiography or cultural historiography, whatever we call, basically the Latin American and the East European models of history of literature. So if I have to give an overview, in briefly I'll talk about the emergence of modernity in Kannada literary culture. Then I'll be speaking on a composite public sphere of theatre and film in Bangalore, which led to these things. Thirdly, I would like to bring in some of the agencies that were involved in this movement of 1970s. And then eventually I'll sum up with a small statement. The emergence of modern Kannada literature could be identified to few writers, Adiga and about 8 or 10 writers, but two important literary magazines, Sakshi, a quarterly which Adiga himself brought along with Srinivas Rao and Sumatindra Nadik for some time, from 1962. Adiga's modernist turn from the previous whatever he was writing took place with Bhumi Gita, the Song of the Earth, poems 1958, and Mannina Vasane, the Fragrance of the Earth, critical essays 1966. Both of them carry the word Mannu in Kannada, which virtually means earth, soil, this in nativeness and the fragrance of the earth that comes at the time of the rain, or when the earth becomes wet. You know, there are lots of connotations with it, which gets clearly reflected in these two. Sankramana, which is another periodical, which is a bi-monthly, started in 1964, 62, 64. This was spearheaded by Chandrasekhar Patil, which is popularly known as Champa, and it's still continuing today. This is the 55th year. There were two more people associated with him, Siddhalinga Pattanshetty and Gireddy Govindaraja. But anyhow, it is essentially Chandrasekhar Patil's journal, very wide spectrum, all sorts of controversies, and what I wanted to do, or if I continue this, I would like to bring in the two first editorials that was written for these two things. Subsequently, Sankramana also brought a Sankramana Kavya anthology collection, very soon, which became a model for Akshara Hosa Kavya, which is again another poetry anthology collection which Lankesh brought after 5-6 years. And the introduction to these two are very important cultural statements of Kannada modernism. It is at this juncture that, in fact, I would also, Patil himself is a playwright. He brought in actually, in addition to poetry, he was a playwright and brought in actually the absurd plays into Kannada. Many of them were staged only during the 1970s, and then virtually not much of a discussion has been done on that. It is in this context that Bhyrappa's Vamshavriksha, which is 1965, and film version 1972, with Karnad Karanth duo as its director. Karanth, I refer to B.V. Karanth here. Karnad is Girish Karnad. Rajiv Taranath as the music director, again son of a great Kannada modernist, Taranath Rao, and Tom Cowan as its photographer, or who did the filming. I'm sorry, Sharif as its Bhaskar Chandavarkar as its music director, and Sharif as its cameraman. Ananthamurthy's Samskara was also written in 1965, the dates are the same, but appeared in the film forum a year early, 1971, again Karnad Karanth direction, Rajiv Taranath as its music director, and Tom Cowan as the photographer. So you will see the amalgamation. We should also look back with the 1950s. Sahitya Academy, Sangeet Natka Academy, and the Lalita Kala Academy coming into existence, NSD coming into existence, and there is a cluster formation, and many of these people went and came back. For example, Shivanand, who is an actor in Samskara, is Gubbi Veeranna's grandson, and he was the first student to get, one of the first Kannada students to get trained in Delhi School of National School of Drama. So the links are getting established. Links are getting established in multiple directions. In the sense, there is a link to the Gubbi company, the professional theatre. There is a link to film, because Gubbi company's famous theatrical productions were subsequently became films. This is standard model, like the Parsi theatre becoming the Parsi films, both, and the Marathi best Marathi plays becoming also like Tukaram and other things. So there is a relationship between the two. Interestingly, both of them attack traditionality, the futility of Brahminical values, and use of sexuality as the medium or the tool of this deconstruction. In Vamshavriksha, the realization to Shostri that he is born to an outsider, and in Samskara, Praneshacharya's accidental relationship with Chandri and its consequences on his identity as a pious Brahmin. This is the burning issue, and these burning issues should be looked within the construction of 1970s. 1972, Kannada Barahagarara Okkuta, to which Kuvempu himself wrote the manifesto, is an anti-Brahmin movement. So all these things get their link. Apart from the fact that both Bhyrappa's and Ananthamurthy's several novels were made into films during this period, some 6 or 7 of their, everything virtually, whatever they wrote, they became films. I will try to provide the list. That aggressive modernism, which I call, the Prasanna in one of the interviews, which has recently come, it has come in Kannada and appeared on the Doordarshan TV, tries to identify 2 types of modernism. The North Karnataka aggressive modernism, where you deconstruct the traditionality very violently, Shantinath Desai, Karnad, G.B. Joshi, who actually published Karnad's writings. On the southern Karnataka one, which is slightly less violent, but Ananthamurthy being located in between, he is more violent, like the North Karnataka one. Apart from the fact, then what this movement or what this atmosphere had was a loosely knit formation of literary, theatre, film, and other people associated with these 3 things, and other social movement, particularly Samudaya, which is actually a social movement which incorporated Loheites, SFI, Dalit, Bandaya, and the other, all that means the Dalit and the OBC sort of confederation. A close relationship between theatre and film could be noticed in the beginning itself. I mentioned about the Parsi theatre, Hindi and Marathi films. Gubbi Company and Bedra Kannappa 1954 is a very interesting relationship. Bedra Kannappa is the hagiography of a Tamil saint from the 7th, 8th century. This became an important film in 1954 because it was produced in Telugu, Tamil and Kannada by the same thing. It gets into the identity formation and census, gets linked with several other things. The play was a hit in Gubbi Company, and the film version appeared in 1954, produced by H.L. Simha and G.B. Iyer. This G.B. Iyer is a very problematic person. He will fit into all forms, traditional, modernity, ultra-modern. He also produced Shankaracharya. So, he also produced some of the films that we discuss here. Let us look at the chronology of some of the films and the literary personalities associated with it, and then the directors. 1966, Sandhya Raga, A.N. Krishna Rao is a progressive, Kannada progressive, produced by Narasimhamurthy and others. 1970, Samskara, Ananthamurthy is the writer, Navya, Karnad and Karanth duo. 73, every year we have an important text and an important film during this period. 1973, Kadu, Krishna Alnahalli, Navya, Karnad. He brought in Amaresh Puri into it, who didn't know even a word. And similarly, Nasiruddin Shah came for another film. Then 73 again, Abitur in a Post Office, Tejasvi, Navya, Lakshmi Narayana as the director. So you have only four or five names appearing during this period, and except one person, none of them had any training in the film. They were all basically writers. They have some experience in theatre, and the most important person, center of activity, is the Karanth himself. Then let me quickly go through that. Then Chomanadudi, this is K. S. Shivaram Karanth, our great writer. Again, he is a Navodaya person, mostly approximately called romantic. Karanth is the director. Hamsa Geete by Tarasu, which is Basant Bahar, which was made in Hindi as Basant Bahar, a progressive, G.V. Iyer and Karanth. Karanth acted as one of the characters in this. Then Pallavi, Lankesh, 1976, Navya, directed by Lankesh. Tabbalyu Ninade Magane, again Bhyrappa, in which I told you Nasiruddin Shah acted, again Karnad and Karanth, directors. Ghata Shraddha, your Ananthamurthy short story, this is Girish Kasaravalli. Girish Kasaravalli is the only person who had a training in film production and direction, and the rest of it were from theatre or from literature or from, this is the scene. Probably I believe this is also the situation in many Indian languages when the new wave come. Rashmi will be probably talking more about that. And then of course, Ondanondu Kaladalli, which I just mentioned, this is already Girish Karnad is in limelight. He produces a film, and in this process of 7 or 8 or 9 years, I'm not going beyond 1980. What is happening is a series of ideas are coming from outside. Long back I wrote a paper analyzing Tughlaq, in which I wrote that what Girish Karnad is doing through chess is he is trying to follow the rules of the chess, because there is reference to Ala Adli as Sarabi in the text, and then there is a lot of information on the. I somehow felt Girish Karnad must have watched actually the Seventh Seal, Bergman's film, where chess. Prasanna subsequently produced another film on the Hindi great writer, Bhartendu, showing that. Okay, so and when we had that discussion, I still remember this is Kurosawa is behind the way he deals with Ondanondu Kaladalli. So what I am trying to suggest is, in a very fluid situation, several hybridities, several absorption, and several compositions are taking place, despite the fact there is no hardcore film culture there. The second issue that I would like to do is a composite public sphere of theatre and film. For this, I will concentrate on several issues, but one of them is the important. 1972, a Bayalu Rangabhumi Prayoga. This is an open-air theatre experiment. This is three plays were produced as a part and parcel of a seminar, which and the agencies that went into it, I would like to bring that into that. 71 to 72, Carnad is in Bangalore because of his Homi Bhabha fellowship. He's trying to write tradition and modernity, on theatre and things like that. 71, 72, Karanth is also in Bangalore. He was teaching in Sardar Patel school here. He took an year's leave and came to Bangalore to direct Vamshavriksha. And initially he started it alone, and local information says that Bhyrappa gave his permission only to Karanth, but Karnad subsequently joined in. And there are, the other world of politics, what happened in the cultural party. I'm not going to bring much of an information, but there is plenty of it there. 1968 is also, from 1968, Sriranga or Adya Rangacharya, the man whom we know, he was the vice president of Karnataka Sangeeta Nataka Academy. And in those days, the politicians wouldn't interfere into that. For example, the other person I was going to talk about, Professor S.L Bhyrappa, he was also the vice president of Karnataka Sahitya Academy, and he did a miraculous work during that period. So, Sriranga would invite him every year to conduct workshops, and that would also conduct a drama competition called the Ullal Shield, in which, you cannot imagine all sort of student group and all sorts of faculty group. From in Mysore there was a group with Ratna Institute of Speech and Hearing. They would come with remarkable plays. I have seen 4 to 5 plays in every week those days. It could be seeing an Yakshagana, it could be seeing a company play, it could also be seeing a modern play. So I'm trying to bring these things into this thing. Then in this 1968 is also a very important day, because Evam Indrajit was produced by B.V. Karanth, and that's a monumental production in Kannada, as much monumental as many of Tughalak and other things that were done. Tughalak had much more earlier history, but I am not going to go into this. And then at the same time, there was Lankesh in the English department of Bangalore University, who is the center of all these things, because he ventured into writing plays, film, newspaper, everything, and he was a master of everything, but didn't excel in any of the things. But tremendous energy, and there was a group working around Lankesh and his close associates. All this was supported, actually, the 1972 event that I have been talking of. And then, there was another person which I should talk, and which probably people have not mentioned. This is V. Ramamurthy, who is Alkazi's student, who had who had gone abroad and got himself trained in stagecraft and light. And the 1972 experiment was a grand success because of his visions and his stagecraft and lighting. And another person who was behind this was the Kannada department of Bangalore University. 200 students and a faculty which were part of this. They were all in and out of that, sometimes on the opposite side and sometimes supporting the. So I'll give you an incident to see how it worked out. All this, the Shivrudrappa was a great visionary and would conceive one seminar every year, 3-day seminar. He would get people from different parts from Karnataka. Anything that he conceived had a Karnataka footprint. He brought out 8-volume history of Kannada literature, in which 630 people wrote, Kannada scholars wrote. So the diversity itself that he was accommodating was something fantastic. And this, in 1972, the seminar was Kannada Rangabhumi, Parampare Mattu Prayoga, which virtually is Kannada theatre, tradition and experiment. And it was thought that they should have 3 different plays on 3 days. One of them is the classical, for which they selected Oedipus Rex, and Lankesh translated it into Kannada. Carnad is the Oedipus, the person Oedipus Rex, and in this group that I am talking, some 300 people, everyone is there into it in some capacity or other. They are at the backstage or they are on the stage. And then the second day, it was Lankesh Sankranti, again written on the death of Basavanna. And Lankesh Sankranti is the most powerful play, centering around Basava and Bijala, relationships. Lankesh acted, and Karanth himself acted. The third day play is a folk play, which Kambar had written at that time. Kambar was an young scholar. He joined the department in 1970. So they did Jokumaraswamy, in which again Karnad acted as the hero. And for all the three, Karanth did the stage direction. I must tell you, in 1972, Ravindra Kalakshetra, which used to be the auditorium in Bangalore for this, was closed for repairs. So it was actually Ramurthy's brilliance to go back to the backstage, look at two Greek pillars, and then conceived. So what we call the Bailurangabhumi, or the open air theatre today, was actually backside entry into Ravindra Kalakshetra, which he converted into a Greek theatre. And then the open space that was there was converted for the folk play and Lankesh Sankranti. There are problems with the play, there are problems with politics and other things, but they actually changed the trajectory of the Kannada theatre and the film movement forever. Okay, so that's the second thing. What it had was maybe about 100 actors put together, all the three plays put together. Prasanna was one of the actors. I think you know the Prasanna that I am talking of, who was subsequently came to National School of Drama, directed Tughlaq for the festival, and also directed the Hindi version of the chess thing that I mentioned. This is Bhartendu's life. About 300 audience. So it is these people initially who were associated both with the film and with the theatre movement. And the theatre and the film were overlapping, in the sense, one day they would do theatre, or for a few months they would do theatre, and for a few months they would do film. Then this is the atmosphere in which both these texts became films. And then of course there were people within, for example, because Karnad had gone from here, he carried actors that he were familiar with. Kannada Bharati here, a very important theatre movement. They staged Tughlaq in Kannada as early as 1954, and I have seen the pamphlet. Pamphlet has the old Lal Killa. Now you remember, how Lal Killa, subsequently Al-Qazi staged it over the Lal Killa auditorium. Okay, but it also had the contradictions within itself. 3 months after these three great things were a success and the films appeared, a small little magazine appeared. This is called Mukta. It doesn't have the editor's name. No one writes in that with this is the anti or the counter statement to this great experimentation and the great cultural sphere. As I was part of that, I knew the three people who wrote in it is actually Prasanna. Prasanna was yet to come to National School of Drama. He was at IIT Kanpur, had left that and had come back for the Samudaya movement, and he was part of the SFI. The other one was T.N. Sitaram, who now is one of the most important TV producers in Kannada. And the third person is K.V. Narayana, my own teacher, who subsequently retired as the professor in Bangalore University, and then was also the head of the Karnataka Karnataka government's Translation Academy. What they did was, Lankesh subsequently joined it. So in this group, the fluidity is at which time they are pro-establishment and which part of the time they are anti-establishment is extremely difficult to gauge. If you look at the pages of Mukta, Lankesh, in the name of Maigalla, in Kannada, Maigalla means a person who is lazy and doesn't want to do anything. He would write, right. And the Mukta's first issue appeared against Lankesh because Lankesh was the center of the open air theatre production. By the sixth issue, Lankesh had become part of the other one. So this This is the, I will skip something and let me briefly go through the agencies. See, in NSD, Karnataka had the opportunity of, Karnataka government placed 4 fellowships in NSD to train its students. So, we had a very big batch. Ultimately, this has to be restricted to get representation for others. So, we have a galaxy of people who have been trained. It's coming to an end. I'm going to finish it. And then many of them got into TV. TV came, started in 1982, the TV came, and then, there was a relationship between the TV and so the sphere is, right. These 7 agencies were never watertight compartments, and there was a continuous osmosis flow between them, resulting in the public sphere that I have been trying to map. Summing up, I'll take 2-3 minutes, that's all. How did such a conspicuously anti-establishment, anti-elite, anti-Brahminical, etc. movement was able to develop during the 1970s? For the answer, we need to look at early 20th century princely state of Mysore. Karnataka was divided into 5 parts, and its growth is never uniform. Even today, it's not uniform. I will confine, because all this activity took place within the princely state of Mysore. In 1884, when Vivekananda spoke in Chicago, on his way back from Colombo to Almora, the Mysore Maharaja invited Vivekananda to Mysore to start the Harijan hostel in 1984. This is the first Harijan hostel to be started. And it followed by various caste groups starting hostels for the education of their, so here is education and the channel to get into that. That is what is being provided. There is clearly a Brahmin dominancy at that time, but this is going to come down by various steps. If you see, in 1917, Diwan Vishwesharaya, one of the person whom we revere a lot, he has to step down from his Diwanship, and it is the first non-Brahmin, Kantaraja Aras, who belonged to the Mysore Odear family in a way, became the first Diwan, non-Brahmin Diwan. Then Mirza Ismail, and then we have the history. Because of these efforts, in 1921 or so, Miller Committee report came. Miller Committee prescribed 23% of the government jobs for the non-Brahmins. The consequences are far-reaching. By the time we got independence in 1947, 49% of the jobs were in the hands of non-Brahmins. And by the time the Havanur report came, Havanur Committee report came, which is 1957 or 58, more than 55% of the government jobs were in the hands of non-Brahmins. It is this, I don't have exact statistics here afterwards to put the threads together and tie up a knot, but having had a highly educated non-Brahmin population, what we see in 1970 is not a wonder at all. It was obvious, bound to happen. Majority of the writings that came up in the Navya, that's why, either deconstruct Brahminism or put an alternative non-Brahminical life in the literary or any other form of representation. It is this high percentage of educated population that constituted the public sphere for the film theatre of the 1970s, which was much more than 49%. It is to the sensibilities of this population that the literary culture of the 1970s was catering to. What I have done is, I have normally, when we have been reading too much about both Vamshavriksha and Karnad and about, I have tried to attempt a text and author-centered reading of representations, avoid doing that, because such representations, such studies tend to become close readings and tend to homogenize the pluralities of production and consumption of literary cultures, in particular the performative public sphere culture. I have attempted to work out a sketchy historiography of Kannada literary culture during the 1970s, in which the two classics Vamshavriksha and Samskara, their literary and film versions, and the reaction to them were produced and consumed. Thank you very much. I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity and asking me to.
Thank you, Professor Satyanath. I request Professor Rashmi to take this forward.
Good evening, everybody, and it's great to see all of you here on a holiday, a double holiday actually today. I'm extremely grateful to the organizers for having invited me, of course, but also for having organized this discussion on Vamshavriksha and Samskara, because this is in a sense a kind of remembrance and a kind of tribute to two people who have passed on this year. One is of course Girish Karnad, who is the lead protagonist of both films, and also Sharda, the lead actress of Vamshavriksha. So it's a kind of tribute to both of them. I will not talk of adaptation. I will not talk of how the literary texts were adapted into film. I've read these texts many, many years ago, so I will not attempt that. But I will talk of these two films in the context of the new wave in Indian cinema, as well as in the context of Karnataka cinema in particular. I think Professor Satyanath's presentation just now was such a wonderful mapping of what he calls the cultural public sphere. And he actually gave a kind of background to what I think will connect to what I will be speaking about in relation to Karnataka cinema. Now, the new wave has had its prehistory, the Indian new wave. The prehistory would of course be the Bengal masters, Ray, Ritvik Ghatak, and several other filmmakers who worked in the commercial realm, who made extremely interesting films, as well as the great Indian Hindi filmmakers in Bombay who were taken up with social issues. I can just name a few: Mehboob, the early Raj Kapoor, Guru Dutt, Bimal Roy, K. Abbas. Along with this, we have the IPTA, the Indian People's Theatre Association, which was an all India movement, which gave an immense number of not just directors, but musicians, songwriters, script writers. K. Abbas was one of them. Many of them. I mean, if we think of Raj Kapoor, actually the initial trilogy, what I call a trilogy, Shri 420, of course, first Avara, Shri 420, Anadi. You know, it is Abbas who has given the kind of model that a lot of filmmakers follow in the 50s through his Avara. So we have the synergy that IPTA provides to the film industries. And of course, what Professor Satyanath mentioned in relation to Karnataka, but also all over India, the film society movement, which is very, very vibrant. It starts in the late 40s. Calcutta is known for it. Ray and Chidananda Gupta were involved. But there are film society organizations all over in Mumbai, even before Calcutta. So from the 40s onwards, film society movement, then of course IPTA, all this is a kind of prehistory to what we call the Indian New Wave. Since it has become very fashionable now to go on questioning the 70 years after independence and say, what has the government ever done? I would like to point out that India was really one of the very, very few, probably the only post-colonial country that took cinema so seriously. 1952, I mean, if you think of 1947, when we get our independence, 1952 is the first International Film Festival of India. Films are brought from all over the world to be viewed here. 1960, the FFC is set up, Film Finance Corporation. That is, already by 60s, they are basing themselves, of course, on prior reports, reports on film, on films that have been set up, very important committees. And 1960, FFC, which later becomes the NFDC, to produce films, films that are out of the ambit of the commercial industries everywhere. And this is again a very forward-looking, progressive kind of thinking. 1961, you have the Film Institute. All this, of course, I think a lot of the inputs have come from the socialist countries, because that is where you find the first film schools. You know, GEEK, the Soviet film school, it's 100 years old. It was set up soon after the revolution in the Soviet Union. So you have, you know, that model is being followed. There is the mixed economy, socialist, part socialist kind of model that is followed. And these are some of the absolutely, now in retrospect, you realize what kind of path-breaking initiatives these were on the part of the government. And then, of course, the NFAI, the National Film Archive, that keeps the film prints of great films from all over the world, that is set up in '64. So all this is, in a sense, laying the ground, this entirety of all the things that I have just mentioned, which lays the ground for something that's called the Indian New Wave, which comes into fruition in 1969 with 4 films, Uski Roti, Sara Akash, Bhuvan Shom, and Konku. Now these films are not just isolated cases. This is a movement that spreads throughout the country. We must always remember that India is the land of many cinemas. It's not just one industry as it is often thought. There are industries in so many states of India. These films were multilingual. They were in all languages of India. They were not just in the major film producing states. You know, you don't find the Indian New Wave films being made only in, say, Kerala or Bengal, but it's being made in Assam, it's being made in Gujarat, it's being made in all kinds of states. And the kind of issues that the Indian New Wave takes up. These are issues that the commercial cinema, which was you know, as I mentioned, many of the directors of the 50s who were looking at issues of social concern, which are no longer taken up in the 60s, the Indian New Wave is taking these up. What are these themes? Broadly, the major themes are caste, the issue of caste, women's issues, politics, extremism, and rereadings of history. You have gender in a very big way, women's issues that comes up. These are the kind of questions that are raised by these films. And what is also interesting is that this Indian New Wave spans a huge spectrum, not only of, as I said, languages and states, but also themes and of styles, more importantly. So from realism right onto experimental and avant-garde cinema, there's a huge spectrum, whether we look at Manikol Kumarshani on the one end and you know, any number of other filmmakers on this side of the spectrum that we would call realist. So the Indian New Wave is an extremely important movement that lasts out till the beginning of the 80s, when there are a whole lot of changes, which I will not go into, which causes this movement, in a sense, to get dissolved and then reinvented in several other ways. So when we look at this huge movement, pan-Indian, I mean, you even look at Maharashtra, for instance. Maharashtra, which we only know for Bollywood, but also it's a state which has Marathi cinema. It's the cinema of the titular language of that particular state, and great films were made in Marathi in this, as part of this. I can just mention Umbartha with Smita Patel by Jabbar Patel. So there are so many kinds of films that are being made all over India. In this, the South Indian segment is extremely interesting. Why? Because there are four states, all four states are producing films: Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. But of these two, it is Kerala and Karnataka that really participate very, very actively in the new cinema. Now, the reasons for this also are several. I will not go into that. But when we look at Karnataka and we take off from where Professor Satyanath has just mapped out that, public sphere for us, we find that it is actually kicked off. The new cinema movement is kicked off by Samskara, which is directed by Pattabhi Rama Reddy, and in which Girish Karnad is the main actor, along with Reddy's wife, Snehalata Reddy, who plays the very important role of Chandri, the outcast. Who is, the person who actually tilts everything in Praneshacharya, this character played by Girish Karnad, tilts his life in a sense. So, and 72 is Vamshavriksha. These are two extremely important films because we don't see the likes of those anywhere else in either the Indian, the new wave, or even till today, these kind of films have not really been made, on the Indian cinema horizon. Now, if we look at Samskara, what is it about? It's about a particular community. There's a town where you have these Brahmins who are very upset because one of their own, a Brahmin who had not been excommunicated but who had gone on blaspheming, who had lived an extremely scandalous life, called Narayanappa, he is dead. Now, the Brahmins are in a dilemma. Do we cremate him or don't we? As they decide, since it's a very difficult question for conservative, traditional-minded Brahmins to decide, the rats start eating, the body starts rotting, all kinds of things happen. Chandri, this low-caste woman, now this Narayanappa has just about done everything possible to break Brahminical sensibilities in all possible ways. He's taken fish from the sacred pond, he's corrupted within quotes the youth, he drinks, he's cohabiting with Chandri. So just about everything that is not to be done has been done by this man. So the whole city, in a sense, the whole town, not city really, is infected with this rotten corpse. There are rats everywhere, there are vultures everywhere. And Praneshacharya, who's the lead priest of this particular town, he is in a dilemma. He's a very sincere and spiritual man, married to an invalid. And he decides to go out and really sort this out, because the other priests are not able to help him with this. So this is the crux of the story. What is interesting here is, and what is interesting, I'll just say a few words about Vamshavriksha, which came 2 years later, directed by B.V. Karant and Girish Karnad. This is a story again about a Brahmin family, about a man who's an old man, old Brahmin. He's a Shastri, he's a priest. He has a daughter-in-law who has been widowed. The daughter-in-law wants to study. She has a little son. She leaves the son behind, goes to study, falls in love, gets married. This particular man she marries has a brother who's an academician, and he wants the dream of his life is to write some books on the culture of India, the whole history of culture in India. And he takes up with a Sri Lankan woman. And finally, all that happens after that. So these two films, as Professor Satyanath mentioned, what really is unique? If we think of the Indian New Wave, there is Ankur, for instance. Ankur is a well-known film. There are many, many other films on the issue of caste. What makes the Karnatakan chapter so very different is that this is about Brahmanism critiquing itself from within. And I think the reasons for that have been laid out by Professor Satyanath, so I won't go into them again. But this is something that you will not find in the other caste themed films of the new wave. If we look at Ankur, what is the intersectionality there? If we look at the kinds of oppression that is being talked about in Ankur, Shyam Benegal's 1974 film, it is about zamindari, it is about the laborers, it is about a woman who's caught at the cusp of both of this, that is played by Shabana Azmi. And it is about their ultimate exploitation, but also about finally, you know, when the child throws the stone, the possibility of a certain kind of rebellion. So here there is the conflict in most, even we can even talk of Akrosh, the tribals, if you remember Govind Helani's film. So everywhere the conflict is between the higher castes and the lower castes. I mean, I'm using lower within quotes. So it is about caste conflict in that paradigm. What makes Samskara and Vamshavriksha very interesting is the fact that here, of course, there is Chandri, who is very key to the dilemma, the spiritual and moral and ethical dilemma that Pranishacharya faces. But a lot of the thematic conflict really is amongst the Brahmins themselves. And this is what is absolutely unique about the Karnatakan segment of the new wave. If we look at the intersectionality, of course there is no oppression as such, but what we are talking of here is about the Brahmins debating within themselves. What are the debates in Samskara? It's about Praneshacharya, one level, the spiritual, philosophical questioning that he gets into. It is about the ordinary priests who are really quite materialistic, not too bothered. They've just bothered that, well, Chandri's jewelry may all, you know, go off to someone else. Let's grab it before, so everybody stakes their claim. They're worried about eating because you can't eat until the cremation is done, and the way they, you know, want to have those particular goodies. And you have, of course, the priest, the Mata's head priest that they go to ask what should we do with this dilemma. And he too, very interestingly, is bothered about property, because he says that once I give you the permission to cremate Narayanappa, this blasphemer, but all his property will come to the Mata, the main Mata. It will not go to this or that priest. So, you know, the whole thing of property, of really how spiritual is this Brahmanism all about? And a sentence that is repeated again and again, which is that although Narayanappa gave up Brahmanism, Brahmanism did not give up on him. And another very important sentence that Narayanappa says in the film, he says that I would have loved to finish off Brahmanism. Actually, I want to do that only if only I could find the Brahmins. You guys are just not Brahminical enough. So that is his critique of the Brahmins. So this kind of a very, very layered critique. And then we also have one other person en route when these people are going to the main Mata. There's one person whose house they visit. And he too has such an ironical and humorous relationship with these priests, because he knows they're going to come in and they're going to ask him to serve up all kinds of tasty food and stuff like that. So this kind of a layered critique of Brahmanism, in a sense, from within the Brahminical community, is something that is not seen. The same is true of Vamshavriksha. If Samskara is about the community, Vamshavriksha is about the family. It's entirely located within the politics of the family. And this old man who really believes that he has to pass on this family tradition, only to find out at the very end of his life that he himself was not really part of that family, that he in a sense is an illegitimate son of that family. So all that he has believed in a sense, gets deconstructed. What is really great about Vamshavriksha, and I think that is all explained again by Professor Satyanath's presentation just now, is that this is really a very, it's a family film. It has no great pretensions to being, stylistically very innovative or anything of that sort. And yet, a theme such as this could have given rise to so much of melodrama, to so much of shrieking and shrill shouting. Especially since the woman actually leaves her son behind and goes off to get married, the widowed daughter-in-law of the house. I found this so, until today, I mean, I resaw this film for this presentation. It is absolutely mind-boggling the way in which all these issues have been dealt with at a very temperate level, in a really debating manner for discussion. It is an absolutely amazing film for the way in which it is talking of actually there being, such flawed foundations of the family, and what really is it that we are trying to retain and keep with us. So if we are looking, these are the ways in which an internal criticism is happening within these films. If we look at the topography, the way cinematically topography has been used in both the films, the way in which he has, Pattabhi Ramareddy has used the community, because it is about the community in Samskara, the way he has used a particular street, the way in which the narrative has been structured in Samskara, where Praneshacharya is first established within this community, this street, his house, and then he leaves, goes out, comes back, but when he goes out, he has already transgressed, he has already violated. He comes back, and then he leaves again. Then the narrative structure is absolutely amazing. This is also Ananthamurthy, as well as the way the film has been done. The third segment is the walk to the fair and the walk back into what is now the evacuated town, because everybody has left, houses have been burnt, plague has kind of taken over, people are sick and dying all around. So these three movements in and out, the city, the town, the movement outside, back again, movement out, and then back again, where we don't know whether he will really, Praneshacharya will actually stand up. And the whole journey to the fair and back, where Praneshacharya is actually willfully polluting, because if you are a Brahmin, then you know that the day after you cremate your wife, you do not go around, it's not free for you to go around and mix. There is this notion of pollution. And this man has not only gone around, he's gone into the temple, he's eaten food there and come back. So all this, I mean, just look at the amount of transgression that Samskara is dealing with. He's coming back, and we don't know what he's going to do, but what is very interesting is that Chandri, this low-caste woman, has actually entered Praneshacharya's house. She has drunk water in his house, and Praneshacharya tells this fellow who has accompanied him to the fair that I have to go back, there is someone waiting for me. This is what the film says. So it's very interesting to see how Praneshacharya's own, the film is about his own questioning and his own realization that his life henceforth is going to be extremely different from what it had been so far. And the same is true of Vamshavriksha. Topographically, two houses. Since this is a family-based film, the house of the Shastri, and then the house of the brothers Karnad. I mean, their two brothers, Girish Karnad and his brother over there, which is a very modern Western-style house. And the way this Shastri finally, when he wants to go into sannyas and he wants to abandon everything, actually comes to this modern house of Girish Karnad, comes to see the daughter-in-law who he realizes he had actually not been very fair to, and comes to ask her for forgiveness, and he leaves for sannyas from that particular house. So extremely interestingly laid out topographically. And finally, the metaphor of evacuation, that you evacuate. When things are rotten to the core, whether it's Samskara or Vamshavriksha, when things are corrupted, you have to evacuate everything and then rebuild. So, and that is what we see in Samskara, the evacuated town, and then Praneshacharya coming back. The only person who doesn't leave is that so-called low-caste woman, Chandri, who stays back and waits. And the same kind of evacuation that we see in Vamshavriksha of the houses where people are willy-nilly forced to leave because the foundations themselves, the fault lines, are so very strong. So I think I will stop here. I think these two films are absolutely amazing, and they really deserve a re-look today. I think their contemporary values and their contemporary significances have only grown with time. It's almost 40 years, I think. But these films, even today, speak to us. In fact, I doubt that these kind of films can be made today, if anything, because these are really so critical of Brahmanism. I doubt that this kind of intersectionality, you know, if we call it Brahmanism within Brahmanism, Brahmanism versus Brahmanism, if that is at all possible today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I request Professor Rita Kothari to make up 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me over. You can see that my credentials to be on this panel certainly have nothing to do with my knowing Kannada, which I don't. And I think my both colleagues have provided extremely fine-grained, very granular kind of approaches to the text and across different genres, right? But I think I'm going to be asking a different set of questions. I mean, Satyanath mentioned towards the end of his presentation that that I don't want to be dealing with textual representation, that it homogenizes things, that there's a kind of a plurality with which texts come, and sort of focusing too much on representation, if we were to kind of discuss what is Praneshacharya's Brahminism like, or how does the Brahminism of Samskara compare with Vamshavriksha and so on, then it can only lead us to a more kind of a homogenized discussion. But, you know, really speaking, stories are formed by the traveling other things have done to regions, and then stories also travel to other regions. And that's also a reality, right, of the stories of these texts. So what does it mean, for instance? What does it mean for someone like me who's from the region of Sindh, Kutch, Gujarat, in the western part of India, where caste is hegemonic, but its grammar and its syntax is vastly different from Karnataka. It's vastly different from Tamil Nadu. What does it mean for someone like me to be then reading these texts? What does it mean for me to be teaching these texts? Because not every text comes to us in the manner that it needs to be grounded. Because after all, we do believe that some part of the meanings are portable. We do believe that some translation happens across regions. What exactly are the parts of these texts that do actually translate? What constitutes, for instance, if you like, a certain pan-Indian nature to a novel that is about caste? Is caste pan-Indian? Is it possible for us to think of caste as a very pan-Indian theme with only minor modifications here and there? Or is the question, Or is the question even deeper in these texts? And that question is, really speaking, what is the constitutive role of caste? How much of Praneshacharya is left after he has been polluted? What does it mean to say his Brahminism is gone? Is it an addendum? Is it an annexure that can actually go by touching somebody, right? Or by sleeping with somebody? I'm very interested even in the question of how both caste and desire regulate each other. That what exactly is the problem here? Is the problem the fact that that Chandri is a low caste woman? Or is the problem that fact that Praneshacharya's foundations of asceticism have been called a bluff? That they are now fragile and open for us to see, that we are able to see what kind of precarity and fragility, and therefore what kind of labor on an everyday basis goes into making these foundations appear almost like they are real, which they are not. So I mean, when Meenakshi Mukherjee, for instance, points out to us that how in the initial pages of the novel, how many times we keep coming across the word everyday, routine, daily, right? Praneshacharya would daily bathe his wife. Praneshacharya, the ritual, the fact that it required this kind of repetition day after day is a rehearsal. And really speaking, purity needs to be rehearsed every day for it to become real. And we know that it is not real. We know that the so-called impurity is just around the corner. I think the novel raises really, really interesting questions, and it's counterintuitive today to be talking about this novel at a time when even in our discourses on Dalit literature, for instance, we see that what are the limits actually of looking at, of externalizing caste as we tend to do in a reading of Dalit literature. That it gets objectified, that it gets externalized, that really speaking, in order to appreciate the full range of meanings that are associated with caste, we do need to understand that Samskara is not only about caste, Samskara is about guilt. Samskara is about disgust, and it is about excess. The kind of discomfort this man is feeling at the fact that there seems to be how peacefully Naranappa is able to enjoy himself. I mean, think of how much to this kind of joy-denying, self-denying, pleasure-denying people, how excessive, repulsive, and alluring it might seem to be looking out there and to look at what kind of pleasures are these that Naranappa is able to have while you are not. And what is also interesting is that, usually we think of, Rashmi mentioned, for instance, the exodus, right, out of the Agraharam, of people leaving the entire, it's very interesting. Usually it's the Dalits who do the hijrat because it gets too oppressive for them. They leave places and go to other places. Right? It's not the upper caste that has needed to leave places. So clearly, it can only have that pralay. The pralay is so exacerbated because it is a pralay from within. That force is not coming from the outside, that it is actually rotten from the inside. And exactly. So I feel like I think what these novels do for me is to actually sort of open up questions of how should we think of texts such as these, whether in the filmic manner or in the form of a book. Should we think of these as being closer to the social reform of the 19th century? Is for instance something like Samskara closer to Venkat Rao's Indirabai in the earlier time, or is it closer, for instance, to some of the Gandhian literature that I have read in Gujarati, or to some of the progressive writers' literature that I have read in Sindhi? Where do we actually situate something like this? Because it seems to both look into that moment, look back at the social reform novel of the 19th century onwards, even to texts like Gora, for instance. I mean, look at Vamshavriksha and Tagore's Gora. The entire sort of edifice of purity upon which Gora wants to build the idea of a pure nation, and he realizes that he doesn't have one. Interestingly, Tagore's Gora reminds us that Gora could have been of Irish blood or English blood and what have you, but I think he still remains on the scale of some kind of racial purity. He has not discovered that he belongs to a certain lower caste blood or anything like that. I think that would have been too much. But I'm beginning to think now that I think we need more, what should I say, a more informed, a more nuanced, I think, approach to caste in the range of entire social meanings that it comes with. And it does not, it is the, I think, the discussion, if you like, on these two texts only reminds us that if at one end of our understanding of caste is the question of ritual purity, which is clearly so high in certainly as you go down south, you will not find this in other parts of India. Which is not to say that caste oppression or that caste as a significant site of meaning does not exist in other parts of India, but it is to say that even for an Indian reader like me, it is through a leap of imagination that I understand what an agrahara might mean. What does it mean, therefore, for me to even teach a text like that to an Ashoka student who has neither an understanding of a region nor an understanding of a space, a certain vas or agrahar, these forms of speciality that come to us from different kinds of texts, the idea that a certain space where if you have sprinkled Ganga Jal, then that space has cordoned off, that space has quarantined, it has become now sanctified. What does sanctification mean with relation to certain spaces? For generations to whom we now teach Samskara, they are not going to understand unless they are familiar with certain kinds of regions and certain castes and certain processes. Therefore, to me, the question of translation is a much deeper one. It is a question about what exactly translates and where do we encounter untranslatability. I see a lot of writings that I've been reading, not so much readings by Kannadiga scholars, but available to me in English. And I see that there is a kind of a puzzlement, a kind of a bewilderment as to how did Samskara, for instance, become so popular, considering these two were being seen by the Kannada literary sphere as almost rival texts, and you could be on either side of either Bhyrappa or Samskara. How does Samskara become so popular? What is it about this particular, is it the fact that Ramanujan was translating it? Is it the fact that, Girish Karnad seems to have acted in both? So what exactly makes it so? And I can only sort of guess at the moment as to what that, I think there is an amazing combination both of things that are portable, which work across different contexts. So for instance, a certain ambivalent relationship. I think Samskara is not, I don't see it as an anti-caste novel. I see it as a novel about an ambivalent relationship with Hinduism. Right? And I think that certainly has a portability. That certainly carries across. But what within that signification, there are clearly certain signifieds where Ramanujan, for instance, also reminds us the untranslatability of it, right? And it is untranslatable because it can, Samskara itself as a concept can range from being the most reductive of meanings to the most abstract, and to the highest form of meaning, right? And I think the novel in its travels outside Karnataka reminds us of this. But I think when we look at the life of a text and we look at the biography of a story that has traveled to other places and how it is received and what do we think about it today, to me these are such significant texts precisely in the kind of range it provides to someone like me who comes from a more mercantile region where Brahmins are not hegemonic, right? You might find, in fact, Baniyas and Kshatriyas more hegemonic, except that hegemony is not a ritual hegemony. It is a hegemony that comes more through transactions, right? It comes more, it's a power that is generated more through money, through economic clout, but which also translates very often into a certain kind of a cultural signified. So that to become Savarna, for instance, in a place like Gujarat, is to become like Jain Vaniyo. It is not to become like a Brahmin, right? So even your M.N. Srinivas's model of Sanskritization will not quite work if we were to equate Sanskritization with Brahminism, right? And yet, we also understand that a certain kind of meaning of caste purity or what have you, a hegemonic, even if it is not about it is Brahminic, but it doesn't have to be about Brahmins. It doesn't have to be about Brahmin bodies. So that's what I'm trying to say, that I think these are also sort of passages that even an Indian reader like me has to cover in order to understand Samskara, right? Or in order to understand Vamshavriksha. There is, and so I feel like as students of literary text and filmic text in India, and I will come for a moment actually back to Rashmi, even about some of the issues of caste and cinema. I think it is important for us to appreciate both the texts in their local and regional forms, and how they need to be understood as things that emerge out of a certain set of context. And I think Satyanath did a wonderful job of bringing our attention to it. But I think they also provide to us an opportunity to see whether, for instance, questions of modernity or questions of reform were similar across different parts of India. Because this also provides us a very interesting insight into the into questions of modernity. When Satyanath mentions how the Mysore state, for instance, established one of the early in the 19th century, the Harijan hostel you mentioned, right? Which is a modernity that is suggestive both of education and of caste. Almost to say you can't separate the two, right? You need a hostel for students, and you are also sort of talking about, and I was listening to that, and I was trying to think what would be the equivalent example. For instance, the Gaikwad state in Gujarat would be that, and this is where Ambedkar came to work. This is the Gaikwad princely state is the one that provided Ambedkar an opportunity, also gave him a scholarship to go and study. He comes to this Gaikwad state once he has studied, and it is here that it is a Parsi innkeeper who does not give him a house to stay, right? So the fact that there is simultaneous in this princely state, both modernity and its failure. You get sort of both examples. And I feel like, I think it sort of takes me back to that moment when Ananthamurthy mentions that how he said to Malcolm Bradbury that you have to go read up some ancient work to understand what your medieval England was like. He said, I don't have to do it, because for me the medieval India is very much a part of the modern India, and both occupy me at the same time. And Malcolm Bradbury says to him, in which case do write something that shows us both, right? And which is what I think Ananthamurthy manages to do. And I feel like that is that the existential questions of Samskara, the questions of purity or impurity in Vamshavriksha, or the questions of how Chandri is also human, which is a very social reform approach to it. A more contemporary Ambedkarite approach to it would be to say, why does Chandri become only an aid to Praneshacharya's male subjecthood? Why should this entire theater of modernity be rehearsed on the body of this male person? Why are other people only providing almost an instrumentalist value to his life? Why are they reduced to this? I think the most fascinating character to my mind in this book is Putta. Because I think he reminds me of Yuyutsu, he reminds me of Vidur. He's both slightly half caste, quarter caste, right? There's some interesting liminal something about him. And when I see a lot of critics who hardly talk about him, or who think that his kind of breezy, you know, free access he has, the fact that he's able to enjoy food out in the open, in the nature, go to these places is kind of so lovely. This is a freedom that's available to him. It might also be his prison. The fact that we are seeing all these people through the eyes of Praneshacharya, there is something very, very Brahminic also about the whole text. It is both anti-Brahminic and very Brahminic. And I think I think there are kind of many more layers here, and I think they need to be opened up. They need to be compared, contrasted, put in conversation with, put in contestation with many other kinds of novels, writing, cinema from other regions also. I think we need to have very kind of genuinely grounded understanding of a text alongside conversations about the text without turning them into, what shall I say, without turning them into slightly superficially cosmopolitan text, which have really no body to kind of, or superficially national. I totally agree. So I think these texts provide a great opportunity, and I think there is just something sort of almost counterintuitive about this renewed discussion on these texts today. It goes without saying that it's not only about tribute to Karnad, but I think it is also, they tell us so much about the times we live in. But I want to for a moment come back to Rashmi's kind of superb drawing of the entire 1960s, 1970s, earlier IPTA, the theater and film movement. And Rashmi, it's interesting, I was thinking, there are also films in this period which are so much about caste, and yet that's not the way they've been remembered. For instance, I'm sort of looking at Manthan, and it's a film that got processed as a film about the Amul experiment, right? And yet the film is such a great example of how an idea of a collective or a community or a democracy is not possible without disrupting caste equations. So I'm sort of trying to understand how this film, exactly. And if you remember, that also has Girish Karnad, by the way. Yeah, that's so interesting. So if you remember this film, this Karnad or Dr. Rao, based upon Korean, right? Wants to start this cooperative which he calls society, right? I find it so interesting, the entire people everyone in the village calls it Sisoti, not society. Yeah? And I feel their attempts to understand what does Sisoti mean for us, right? How in a Sisoti I become that, although I'm a Dalit farmer, but I get the same right as the upper caste farmer, is such an interesting metaphor of democracy in the making, and also about translation of democratic ideas which do not quite find the same equivalences, so that society understood as Sisoti is also about a certain indigenization of forms of democracy and modernity, that when they come to you, you try and understand them in your own language, and how hard it is. So that even a cooperative about milk cannot end up being only a cooperative about milk. It has to. It cannot but not go into the caste equations, right? And so I think to me, more than there being modern, both modern and classics in this very interesting way, to me, these novels provide an opportunity for us to nuance our understanding of regions and of caste, and also about challenges of translating linguistically and non-linguistically to even modern day audiences, to classrooms, to students. I think these texts bring to me very sort of a rich kind of array of challenges in that area, and that's the space I occupy in the discussion that has happened today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for 3 very rich presentations. We can take questions now if you have comments, questions.
Excellent panel. Thank you very much. I mean, the most erudite panel I've had the pleasure to listen in long years. I'm a member of the Habitat Center, and I've been here for 20 years. So it's a great panel. Also because, you know, the subject is so close to my heart, I'm here primarily to pay respect to Girish, who I knew a bit. Karant, he went before we could do any of this, so to him as well, because I knew him a little bit. And we've talked about this when he was alive. I was directing his Hayavadan. And this whole concept of transposing heads is actually how I approached Samskara, in terms of how you cannot translate the word Samskara into English. There is no English because of the elevation it has from the bottom to the top, in terms of what does ritual do to the Atma, or suppose the atom you have, which has layers and layers of karma on it, till you're actually funeral rited, put into cremation, and then released. Because you can't do this easily, you can't. So the concept of Samskara fighting with Sansara, is the actual way that I look at that film. That he is penduluming between Sansar and Samskar, and we don't know where he'll actually end up, which makes that film very interesting to me. The other thing that, of course, that all of you brought up was the fact that we're looking at fiction, and we're trying to see a lot of fact in it. Fiction essentially is not fact. I run a small exercise I call the fictionarium. We're all fishes swimming in waters of total selection by the author or the filmmaker. What does that filmmaker actually select from the reality that he or she sees around himself or herself to give you the story that he has given? I mean, it's not reality. It's taken from, for instance, I mean, he could, like we do in a camera, keep out of the frame certain things and keep certain things inside. We only see what the person selects. The third one, and this is where my question really comes in, is this fine parallel which you're almost there. Professor Kothari almost got us there. That during the same period of 70, 71, 72, 73, Rajesh Khanna was going crazy as the biggest hit maker in cinema in India. And they were also, in terms of the Bombay's need to do it and the idea of national integration and the breaking down of class barriers, they were also doing the same things. They're trying to show that a rich guy could marry a poor girl, and except that they're doing it so badly that I imagine this entire Kannada or the Karnataka group would have got up and said, hey, we can do this much better. Listen, the way we break down what are called traditional relationships are far more realistic in the kind of films we will make. So we have Ankur, the Zamindari system breaking. They're all different from the way the same the films made out of Bombay were also trying to do. Constantly there's a rich boy marrying a poor girl. There is Rajesh Khanna in love with Sharmila Tagore, who is actually a sex worker. There's that famous film from Bengal. So they were trying to do the same thing. It's just that these people decided we're going to do it, make it alternative. Yeah, we're going to do it differently. So would that bring up some kind of an idea of how the overall mainstream cinematic culture also drives the alternative guys to challenge it? And they say we can do the same thing better, or we can do it better, or they really don't know what they're saying. Wait till I make the film. And the last question is whether, was Ananthamurthy a Brahmin? Was he? Yeah, okay. So maybe you can talk about this fact fiction issue of selection. And the second part of is, does mainstream actually try to do the same thing but fails, and so alternative cinema takes up, or alternative writings take up?
Your question is directed at a particular member of the panel, or?
I think I'd take umbrage to the Rajesh Khanna comment. I'm not sure. I'm sure Rashmi will agree with me. I don't think this idea of the mainstream or the minor stream or I think popular Bollywood responds to a certain set of imperatives. And however dodgy they might be ideologically, I think they are very fecund and very fertile opportunities for us to think about how, for instance, in the rich boy marrying a poor girl, there are fantasies about how caste can be completely masked by class finds a place there. And so the point is not whether the one that makes caste overt is necessarily better than the one that does not. I think both give us an opportunity of thinking about the issue in more kind of interesting ways. So I feel like some of the generalized kind of a North Indian, right? The generic North Indian landscape of the Bollywood, in which a Khurana or a Saxena or a Verma, who's not supposed to have any caste, and yet of course we know what caste it is, I think is such a good example of how for centuries we remain as hoodwinked, as self-deluded people to think that there can be an unmarked secular citizen who doesn't have a caste. So I think those are great opportunities to think about it in the
the new wave came to be precisely because the commercial cinema could not really address these issues anymore. And in fact, it's very interesting to see the names that were given to this cinema. Parallel cinema, other cinema, parallel to what? Other to what? Precisely commercial cinema. These were, again, terms given to make it seem as if this cinema was dependent on the commercial cinema, because the definition was by negation. Yeah. But I don't think that is... Art cinema is still a better one. You see, abroad, the term that is used is autorial cinema, auteur cinema, right? So that makes it, it's a better term, because what is happening there is that whether you're working within the genre framework or without the genre framework, you are leaving the stamp of the author. You're leaving your own signature on that material that you're dealing with. There's also the term poetic cinema. In the Soviet Union it was used. Tarkovsky was a poetic filmmaker. So these terms I find are much better than the other cinema, the parallel cinema, because these terms are really defining it. Experimental, avant-garde, yes, those are more to do with styles. These were names given to the Indian new wave cinema, which, the Indian new wave is known by these peculiar terms. So I don't think that the filmmakers were really trying to say that, well, we can do it better. Not at all. I think they couldn't. The commercial filmmakers could no longer handle these themes. And it is this vacuum that the new cinema is actually filling up. It's what you said, that there are certain facts that you mask or you leave out of the frame, and that's also something that Professor Kothari just mentioned, that you leave out, you take in the class factor, rich and poor, Amar Prem, rich man and poor prostitute. But you leave out, for example, the caste equation. So you're leaving it out of the frame. Those are facts that you choose not to deal with, which the new wave cinema is actually going into. There's also the question of style. There are also several other things which are different. I don't think it's really correct to say that these people were only thinking, oh, we can do this so much better, so let's do it. I don't think that was really their agenda.
That wasn't the motivation?
No, I doubt that was the motivation.
Just to add another point, I think the Bollywood film was too flat. One of the reasons why the regional cinema said we go to cultural specificity, we go to details, we go to a paraqualized space, is just because they were protesting against the flatness of the Bollywood. Yeah, right. Yes. So hence, I think this also helped us in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s. We struggled as students of film and theatre. We struggled so hard to understand these caste region specificities being brought into the these alternative cinema, and we find it not very difficult, because you will see a Slavic film, you will see a French film, you will see a Polish film, but you still struggle to understand, and then come back and then also look at the Indian films that were coming. I think there was a good lot of interaction between these East European and the not so dominant non-English European films, which were quite available in the film circuit, and the type of films that were being made in the regional languages.
He was producing these art films and making his own commercial films.
And he was a comedian in the Kannada, standard Kannada format.
Humse Geete, 1975, simultaneous with Chomana Dodi by B.V. Karant, Choma's drum. Humse Geeta was a huge hit. And what was it? I mean, now looking back, you realize how much of communal thinking was ingrained in popular culture. The whole bit about this singer, again, singer, it's obviously all high caste, but none of it is mentioned. He goes looking for a maverick guru, played by B.V. Karant, somewhere in the wilds. And then he comes back, and then of course he teams up with, again, I think she's a courtesan or something. Right. But that's all incidental. What finally makes it's the Baiju Bavra of Kannada cinema, in the sense of Tipu Sultan finally coming and asking him to sing, and he preferring, to cut his tongue off. So G.V. Iyer is a very interesting character, moving through all these separate worlds. So it's not that these worlds were all compartmentalized and isolated from each other. There was a lot of movement within.
The pendulum between Samskara and Samsara, going, which one should I choose? Yeah. I mean, you could do a great commercial cinema and still do an alternative. I think a lot of that is happening today. Yeah. This is what's happening.
I think there is a nice blurring.
This blurring that's happening today is thanks to the kind of effort put in historically in the 60s and 70s. So my tribute to Anish and
Yeah, I just thank you to all the panelists for an excellent discussion. I just wanted to say that New Wave Cinema is also called as Sarthak Cinema in Hindi, or meaningful cinema. And in this discussion, I wanted to say, like, there is a film Ek Duje Ke Liye, which was made by K. Balachandar, and also showed caste conflict, North Indian going to Tamil Nadu, Tamil Brahmin, played by Rati Agnihotri, and Kamal Hassan playing the North Indian, and it was beautifully portrayed, though it was a commercial setup, but still, the movie was able to bring out the North-South divide and the caste equations as well. And another film by Bobby, it showed the class divide. So by and large, Bollywood commercial cinema has stayed away from caste, depicting caste conflicts in the society, because it is supposed to be a escapist cinema, because people go to watch Bollywood mainstream movies to escape from the reality, everyday reality, which is mundane, and so they want escapism from that. So that way, it is all commercial cinema has its own, because people are poor, and so they want to escape from everyday mundane reality. So they don't want to see the reality. So that is how the this for the intellectuals, this new wave cinema, and it came out. That is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I'll come to my question. S.L Bhyrappa's Vamshavriksha marks its distinction from Samskara in one question. It deals with Bijakshetra Nyaya. It is always one of the major conflict handled by S.L Bhyrappa in several of his novels. and like as it comes in Vrachakatika, Bijakshetranaya. Actually, I'm not aware of much of Bollywood movies and other Indian cine lands which deals with the same kind of conflict. Bijakshetranaya, wherever a person marries a woman, her womb is owned by him, whether it has been seeded by him or by someone else, but the child is considered to be his successor. And after a time, we started to deny that. The Indian culture initially was accepting that, and there was no taboo on that one. But later it became taboo, and people started to say that it is illegitimate, and not only illegitimate, it is illicit. So started feeling guilty about it, and where Vamshavriksha comes in that part, the main character is when he goes on learning that he himself is an illicit heir of the family, but according to the old Bijakshetranaya, he is a legitimate heir. Actually, that happens with the consent of the husband to get through some character. What's his name? Kittaya, if I believe. His real father is Kittaya. And which are the movies focus on the same issues? Actually, I am not very sure. Vamshavriksha movie really can highlight this point, but there should be some movies in the cine land which deals with this conflict. Utsav, even though it is a Mruchakatika's form, but it also doesn't highlight that part. There the prince who revolute back is a what we call the heir of the same kind. He is not exactly the heir of seeded by his father.
Let us respond to you really briefly, because then I think we should hear other people who have been raising their hand. Which is to say, I think the neurosis about pure origins and the neurosis about nationalism gets dealt with even in a mainstream film like Dharmaputra, for instance. It's a Bollywood film which has this person who's so kind of obsessed with the idea of legacy, of purity, and so forth, and realizes that he didn't know whose son he was, that those he meant to hate but actually are the ones who have produced him, and he's kind of rendered completely, helpless in the face of this. So I think my response to you is that the questions of how of our own finiteness or finitude or whatever the word is, in the face of these exalted ideas, right, of purity, lineage, continuity, and so forth, these are themes that people deal with in different ways. They may not, the manner may not be exactly the same, but they deal with it in different ways. And even in a very commercial film, these questions may have found a place. But we have not developed, I feel, a certain kind of critical eye to see that in that format. Yeah. Maybe we can go over to that one last question and then we need to wrap up.
Yeah. So I'll make it short, and I also I think maybe it would have been more productive to bring it up earlier, but I was thinking of translating this idea of this neurosis for origin, or what Vamshavriksha, the belief that the genealogy must be preserved, into methodological concerns, which we in fact see in the panel today, because I felt that there was a certain difference of methodological approaches which can very easily be translated into the same things that the actual content of the books is about. So for example, we began this idea that there are a certain number of non-Brahmanical educated intellectuals in Kannada, in the world of in the Kannada public sphere at that time, which gives rise to this sort of anti-Brahmanical exploration, or let's say ambivalently Brahmanical exploration is still a way of enshrining continuity, because we are looking um, for things that can be explained through reason, which is a causal chain. This happened, so this happened, and then so this happened. So this person was the father, and his son, and his son. And that is where I am saying that this idea that later emerged in the discussion of counterintuitiveness, the fact that we can't explain why today on 15th August we are doing this, the fact that we can't explain why Samskara, for example, chooses to make Paneshacharya the protagonist and not Naranappa, because Naranappa is actually the one challenging, or Chandri is the one challenging, but Praneshacharya is that we can't explain. And I think the fact that we can't causally, historically explain is the value that we derive, that these texts enshrine, which only close reading can recognize, which cannot be recognized in historicizing without close reading. Historicizing is important, of course, but close reading has to be, they have to go in tandem. It can't be one over the other, which I think that the panel brought out very well, because both things were there. In fact, when Naranappa, for example, says that you are not Brahmanical enough for me to challenge you, I think it's Ananthamurthy making that statement that I will make Praneshacharya my protagonist because he is the most Brahmanical you can be, the most well-intentioned Brahmin that you can be, and yet the system that is Brahmanism will not allow you to be a good human being despite wanting to be. It's about even creating a schism within Praneshacharya where maybe I would say that Ananthamurthy is in a way trying to exercise Brahmanism from within a Brahmin's body. It's like when Gandhi says that hate, but not the hater. It's a very difficult thing to say, to do.
Yeah.
No,
that's a good point. I think, in fact, talking of close reading, I was thinking how this novel is also so much about desire.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, it is so much about that Praneshacharya becomes the generator of desire. Those Sanskrit texts which he thinks are meant to soothe you and to make you more spiritual are the ones which are seething with sexuality, right? So I think it's a it's a very layered, very layered and very political text also in that sense.
Yeah. Just one more thing. I think the one thing that the film misses, I think, in Samskara is the character of the other Brahmin with whom Praneshacharya goes to study. I'm forgetting his name, Mahabal or somebody. Yeah, Mahabala. And then like that's a very interesting moment because Mahabala actually chooses that he will not go on with this. And Praneshacharya envies Mahabala like anything. And the point that you made about envying Naranappa, it's already there in envying Mahabala and the way that he can just leave it all. But really thanks for everything.
Which is also why it lends itself to such a psychoanalytical reading, this particular novel,
I
right?
agree, but maybe that's not.
No, I just make a comment. Actually, when I put this post and when we talk informally and say this is what we do, one of the notes that one of my friend put was, "Oh, you are still lionizing these people." Okay. For that I wrote, the question of lionizing doesn't arise. The text in a literary culture is always available for rereading, reinterpretation and other things. If I have not done a close reading, that's because of a different reason. Because I knew definitely two of my co-panelists will do a reading. I'm not against. In fact, the best within the tension between closed and distant reading, people actually advocate doing both because we cannot miss the insights that we have gotten in the last 150 years because of close reading. So, and at the same time, distant reading being a new tool, I think we have to do a good blending of the whole thing, and I believe this panel tried to do it. To the best of my knowledge, no, to the best of my knowledge, it's not there. It was included. The see, for example, the Chanda Maddale, the one of the poem collection of Adiga, brings in the Yakshagana scene into that, which I think is not part and parcel of that. Some of the jokes were actually told by Ramanujan in his autobiography. That gets into when they drink on the river bed and talk. One of the jokes is that I'm sorry. He's a great rasika. He makes his wife eat badam and drinks the milk in the night. This is not there in the text. This is actually Ramanujan writing in his autobiography, Mattabana Atmakate, and that was brought in there. So the film production, I mean, we at that time we thought there should be a good correlation between the text and the film, but which now by that time itself the directors have started saying this is our play. This is not the play of Sriranga. This is not the play. So I think this is always possible, and we can we.
Well, yeah. Sure. Ma'am, your mic.
I mean, say that probably there's no such thing as escape, pure entertainment. All commercial films are also taking up social issues. They are also extremely ideological and political. The kind of argument you seem to make. No. It's always well, anyway, I personally think that commercial cinema too is extremely political. This gentleman went off, has gone out, the critical insider question that he raised. If we look at Kannada cinema, this is not the end. Chomana Dodi is also about caste, but again the intersectionality there is different. Gatashraddha is again about caste, and Kadu, and if we look at the arch, it ends with Faniyama, the first phase of the new wave, Prema Karan, and there too she is topographically placing herself in a house. It's very interesting, the house and and she's a widow, and again the question of caste. So this is a theme that really runs through persistently in Kannada cinema, and I think that is an extremely important thing that we need to keep in mind. And well, I do agree with you that close readings are extremely important, and it's about the tree missing the forest or the forest missing the tree. Either way, you have to have both the context and the text in there.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry we are getting late. That's why we have to wind up. I want to take this opportunity to really thank the three of you for looking at the text, bringing in such exciting ideas into it, and it was overall a very, very fruitful, provocative discussion, and thanks very much for participating in this. And some of you who would like to continue attending the series can please share your email ID with me. I'll keep you informed. Once again, I thank the three panelists for their time and knowledge.